Good afternoon, LinkedIn and YouTube, and welcome to this week's very special episode of Hired. I am your host, whether you like it or not, Mike Thompson from Spark. And each week we bring you a new topic to discuss about what's going on in this crazy labor market and this extremely broken hiring process. And today I am so excited for the conversation we're going to have with my special guest, who I will bring out shortly. But let me tee up her a little bit in terms of what you can expect. We're going to be talking about product talent today, but specifically how the interview and how we assess product talent is inefficient and ineffective. And my guest, Rootu Joshi, will be really dissecting that and sharing her insights into the interview process and how it needs to change and be more dynamic. And she comes from both sides of that interview table, and her insights are great. So let me tell you a little bit. She was doing product before product was even cool. Back in 2007, she's been doing this for over 15 years in the product world. She's worked at Amazon, Expedia, and her most recent engagement with Wish. She is fantastic, full of energy, full of insights, and I cannot wait for you to meet her. So without further ado, because you're not here to hear me talk, you want to hear from my very special guest. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Rootu Joshi. Rootu, welcome.
Hi, Mike. Thank you so much. That was a really lovely introduction.
Well, I do offer this. I can just cut that, and any Zoom meeting you have, you can just have that play before you just pop into the Zoom call. So that I'll give that to you for free, or we can record something different if you'd like. I can be your hype person.
Yeah, you are my little hype person.
Where are you dialing in from today?
So today I'm dialing in from Austin. I am pretty much a nomad. I've been around the United States during the pandemic. Started off in California, Seattle, Colorado, North Carolina. And for now, I have found a little bit of a quiet time in Austin.
So let me ask you this before we get into the important stuff. Seeing as you've moved and lived in different parts of the US, if you could live anywhere in the world next, where would you live and why?
I actually love California a lot. There's a few things, the power grid, the fires and the taxes, but Palo Alto and Menlo Park, the reason why they are so expensive and everybody wants to move there is because the weather is just fantastic. And I've lived in many places around the world. I grew up in India, and I just find uh, the environment so vibrant, and just being around Stanford. I always wanted to be a Stanford graduate and never got there. So for me, there's a lot of reasons why Palo Alto and Menlo Park and Atherton, if one can afford it, are sort of paradise on earth for me.
Amazing. Well, you're a California West Coast girl for life. Sounds like
For
they've
life.
converted you and you're there. And it's never too late for Stanford. Never.
I I know, if it's not me, it's my son.
Fair enough. That's what we do, right? We live vicariously through our children. So well, maybe he'll be in Stanford Red. So you never know.
Go Cardinals.
All right. So I'm super excited for this conversation because we've had a series of discussions offline about the product labor market and what's going on there. And it's seems like it's just recently caught fire in the last few years. Demand has spiked, supply is not really there. And there's a real challenge with organizations not only attracting the right product talent, but really assessing them through the interview process. And that's what I want to focus our conversation on today, is just dissecting how we interview talent in the product space and how we can do it better for people that are either interviewing product talent or looking for their next role. This will be valuable. So before we do that, I want to set the stage. And this may be a tough question, and I'm known to ask the hardball questions off the bat. But how would you measure success of a product manager?
So Success is, all I have to start with is it depends. Because as the product role has evolved over time, it's not just a single type of product role. There's many different types of product managers out there. There's growth product managers, there's platform product managers, there's consumer product managers. And as the roles become specific and as we start understanding product management as a valuable role and as an art within of technical and non-technical organizations, it just becomes more difficult to have a singular measure of success for a product manager. So for instance, if I was a growth product manager, my success would be measured on how well I understand the business, how well I understand the flywheel, what experience I have in that kind of space, understand who the consumer is, where these consumers are, how well I work with, business development, how much I know about growth tactics, how much do I know about just, the growth flywheels, or am I a graduate of Reforge, so on and so forth. That really determines how well of a package you present as a growth product manager. Um, if you look at platform product managers, there's a lot of developer ecosystems that you're working with. There's a lot of backends you're working with. There's a lot of tech skills that you need in order to communicate with your stakeholders and partners, which are highly technical and mostly engineers. Even your consumers end up being developers and engineers. So there is kind of a need for that highly technical background or understanding, or the skill set to communicate technically with those partners and stakeholders and consumers. So that kind of, is a different measure of success. So I could go on with, all of the different types of product managers, but the short answer is it depends.
And it sounds like it's complicated. It's not an easy thing to answer because of the wide range of product managers out there, and the needs for them vary depending on what product you're working on. And ultimately, where is the product in maturity? Is it net new? Are you adding features? Is it externally facing, internally facing? There's so many different facets to this that it's not an easy thing to just say like success is this in product. It's very difficult. So as we set the stage there saying it's complicated, when we talk about interviewing product talent, what does a typical process look like from your perspective? And I think I'll start there. Like, let's do what a typical product process, and then we're going to dissect it and kind of figure out what's wrong with it and how we can make it a little bit better.
So, as you know, there's a lot of material out there. There's a lot of coursework. There's a lot of coaches. There's, Exponent. There's, product management exercises. There's Lewis Lin. There's, Decode and I forget the name of the book, but by Lewis Lin. And there's a lot of, product management interviews are sort of a mix, right? So there's a if you're going into a more senior, there's a leadership aspect of it, there's a behavioral aspect of it, then there is the product sense and the product execution aspect of it, which are the core product management skill sets that one assess, specifically if you're looking at the Mangs right now. So if you go to Facebook, if you go to Google, and a lot of people are copying those methods, is, typically those are the 4 to 5 sort of interviews you go through. Obviously, there is the starting point where you're talking to a recruiter. There's obviously, once that happens, you get into a phone screen. And once the phone screen is crossed, you then get into the on-site and get into these loops of product sense, execution, and behavioral and leadership. Google also does a lot of strategy type conversations, which I believe are very similar to how the big 5 consulting, so McKinsey, they have the case study sort of interview that is thrown in. So I think a lot of the product management interviews in different companies are a mix of all of these. So some have more, some have less. But that's kind of, what I feel is out there in the world. A couple of years ago, there used to be, and I think Uber still does that, where you have to take a take-home assignment, and
Hmm.
there's a case study that you do on your own time, and then you have to go work with a panel, and they will talk about the case study, and it's almost like defending your case, writing a thesis. But those are also a part of some of the companies, but I see that that's being taken away from the hiring pipeline very quickly.
So it's lengthy and intense, is what you're saying. Like it sounds like there's a lot of rounds, a lot of things that we need to vet out of product managers to see if they're fit. And really, I guess the Mangs started this framework that has now been adopted to the masses in terms of how they're replicating that and using that across the board as the gold standard for how you assess product talent. Now,
Exactly.
what is wrong with taking an approach that was effective, call it 10 years ago, and now just saying, this is how we do it for all product managers, all seniority levels, all like we kicked off, doesn't all types of product managers, this is how we interview them with this approach. What's wrong with that?
So I think that one takes a very academic approach to product management. I mentioned early on that there's a lot of material out there, there's a lot of coaching out there that one can take, there's a lot of mentorship out there. And one can become really good at interviewing and really crack those interviews. But does this a good determination of how well you're performing on your job? Because your experience, what you've done in your past, what type of products you've shipped, what type of products you haven't shipped, what failures you had, what you've learned from that entrepreneurial sort of aspect of product management gets completely ignored in these sort of processes. So in the very beginning, when product management was new, I remember I interviewed pre-IPO Google, and Marissa Mayer was leading the product organization, and there were just a few product managers, and I was in Seattle, and one of the questions they asked me was a regular popular product questions, like take a product and improve it. And I remember going directly into solutioning. I had a particular product, I talked about it, and I didn't know the process. But if someone came up to me right now, or someone gave me the process, or the steps or the frameworks, and that same question was asked again 10 years ago, had I known that, I would have cracked that interview. Does that make me a better or worse product manager? Does that make me better or worse fit at Google? Not really. It just makes me someone who's good at interviewing. So I think fundamentally taking this academic approach to interviewing, specifically in roles that require experience, that require leadership, I think these interview processes lack that way of assessing these candidates that would fit the role better than the folks that are just starting out in the career and need to learn about product management.
So it's safe to say that because these interview practices have been around for a long time, there's a lot of information out there on essentially how to win the interview and how to crack the code, because the Mangs have been interviewing this way for 10 years. So there's a lot of people that have surfaced, this is how they interview, this is how they assess product talent, and here's how essentially you can win. And we've seen this similarly on engineering as well, in that where the
Exactly.
engineer interviews have kind of been moved down. So I guess if you're looking at hiring and assessing product talent, how would you design an interview that you think would give you a fair assessment of where someone would fit on your team and in your organization?
So I think it's, again, a very tricky process, and that's why one hasn't solved it in its entirety. But I do think that discounting a person's experience is something that does a disservice. And I have in the past made those mistakes where I have gone strictly on interview performance, not really cared about one's background or one's history, and really gone into getting those folks on board and seeing them not able to keep up with the demands of that particular role. One of the things I like about Amazon, and when I was at Amazon, one of the things we learned was better hiring practices, and they would, as a new Amazonian, you had to do that training. Um, and everybody needed to go and learn about how Amazon hires individuals. And whether it's an engineer, whether it's a product manager, whether it's any role, the system of hiring is essentially the same. You go ask them a question on the experience, and then you go deeper and deeper and deeper into that scenario, that project, that role, and you keep asking them different sorts of questions, trying to get more information out of it. The goal for doing that sort of interview is understanding how much was that individual involved in that particular, because I embellish my resume, everybody embellishes their resume. So understanding at what point, how much were you involved, what was your specific involvement. And then the second thing is, of course, the authenticity. I've seen in Amazon when I've interviewed folks is, they've written something on their resume, but they're just totally unaware of, what they've written. So those two things, once they are assessed, and I like that, once they're assessed and once you get the gist of what this individual is capable of performing based on their history, I'm all for going and putting them through that execution and product sense to just make sure that they're able to understand product management as an art form, as a job role, and that they will be doing that role in whatever level that they need to perform at. So for instance, if I bring someone at a leadership role, I don't want someone who's just a leader, because there's, attrition that's going to happen. People are going to move around the roles, and there's going to be times when you have to really know what your product is, what you're shipping. You have to have that depth of knowledge. And so I'm all for product sense and execution, but once we understand the breadth of their experience, once we give them these opportunities and then weed out those folks who are not really a good fit for that particular role.
I like what you said there about initiating the interview process by getting to know somebody and really kind of digging deep into experience that's relevant to them, and kind of letting them not start off with trying to give the right answer, but just tell their story as to what they did, why they did it, what they considered, what the risks were, and really just getting inside their process to understand how they operate and who they are as individuals before we go and apply a rigid interview framework to them to just assess people that can, understand frameworks and answer questions correctly almost. So I really like that approach of humanizing, personalizing the interview process from the onset. Why do you think most organizations don't do that and they just defer to this rigid process? And this is your opinion. I'll preface it here.
No, I have a very good understanding of this, because at Wish we really had to look into a hiring process. And first and foremost, as a company, if your hiring process is not streamlined and if the expectations are not set right from the get-go, then it becomes a very confusing experience for your candidate, right? So as a candidate, when I go into a company, if I have step-by-step knowledge of what's coming up, what I need to do, or how I need to mentally kind of prepare myself, it really helps expedite the process. And it also brings candidates some sort of a comfort to know this is what's happening. We had very different hiring processes for the same role in different organizations at Wish. And we consistently get that feedback from our recruiting team to really streamline that process. So I think if I was a big company and I needed to continuously, hire people and, put people, butts in seats, I need to have some sort of a way to organize that whole process. The second thing is, the reason why they have this is, it's very historic. So you keep doing what you've been doing, and smart people have been coming and wanting to come to those companies. And if I wanted to go work at a Ming, and if I had that experience and they didn't really care about that experience, I'd still go through the process of, coaching myself and learning finding people to help out. And there's mock interviews happening, and you can schedule those, and it's insane how this whole interview process is working right now in the systems, and it's people are monetizing it. So I think that I can understand where they're coming from, given the hiring process being so slow, and the needs being coming in so quickly. So
I hear what you're saying, and I get it in terms of scaling and kind of needing a process. But I also fundamentally believe that's what's wrong with the hiring process, is because we're so concerned on what scales, and you're forgetting about the experience in terms of like what really matters, and like having some loose, or not loose, having some tight criteria on what you want that experience to be, and really entrusting your people to express those however they feel, as long as the candidate walks away from that experience and they all feel the same way, even if the process looks a little bit different, is I think where I would like to see more organizations go, instead of this is how it has to go, this is step one, this is step two, this is step three. It's just, it needs to be more dynamic. And to your point, like, it's just, it makes it slower. And like, that's not a great process. I've heard of some people that can take 3 to 6 months to interview for a role. That's insane. Who's investing that amount of time for a role? And I think like with the market changing, that has to change, right? Like there's no way that that could be sustainable given the demand of talent right now. Don't you agree that that has to change a little bit, even with the demands?
I agree, because I'm on forums, and I'm obviously very curious about this entire hiring in product specifically. I see folks really talking about perhaps the 3 to 6 months is a way to make candidates not have any competing offers, right? So, hey, you want this job, we're going to take this long, and then this is the only offer you're going to have. Maybe they're assessing your commitment. If it's 3 to 6 months and you have a job, a full-time job, and you have to prepare for this interview processing, and you're going through, these mock interviews. I see, mothers, fathers, students. It's just insane. It's like having a second job going through this 3 to 6 weeks. And then, I think they have a 10% acceptance rate. So 90% of people are being rejected, and they're trying and trying and trying again and again. And I think the one big driver is the prestige and the compensation, right? Because if I were to put in this effort right now, and if I were to just go with the flow, and if I were to dehumanize myself this way, perhaps the fact that I land up in this position might change my career graph and my career path forever. And so I think that the core, it's not just the process that is not human. It's the fact that the idolization, the blind idolization of these so-called prestige companies, where they demand a lot out of you, even to get your foot into the door, whether you're capable or not. That's none of their concern, right? Because in their mind, they're offering you a lot more than what you're bringing to the table. Because a person like you is dime a dozen. If it's not you, it's someone else. It's like being in the movie industry or something.
And I see a change coming, because I feel like there's a revolt, and there's the startup revolution, right? There's so many more opportunities to get that experience that's valuable and get well compensated for that, outside of the handful of companies that had been doing this for a decade prior. So I think, there's going to be more and more movement away from that, because there's too much demand, and I can't see that sustaining people wanting to interview for 6 months, especially knowing that the stats of 10% of people make it through that process. Like, it just doesn't seem right now. And I know we've taken a lot of your time, but I want to finish on this. I want to finish on, through your experience of being on both sides of the interview table, especially what's happening lately in the market. How has this recent shift of candidate behaviors adjusted your approach to when you will be attracting and assessing talent?
So I think I'm going to take a very empathetic approach. Um, I have heard the stats, and I also believe I have been guilty of doing that a few times. Is, I get into an interview, and within the first 5 or 10 minutes, I do make my decision whether this person is, likely to be a good candidate to move further. So I think that, and I have used, case studies, jumping right into, just getting your product management skills. Let's see what you can do, how you can do this. And a lot of times I've seen candidates that I've personally hired. Some of them are rock stars and some of them have trouble succeeding. So I think for me, I'm going to try and employ more of these human, empathetic ways of looking at a candidate.
Hmm.
The one thing I can tell you from my personal experience is I've always considered myself a bright person, you know, but I'm not really good at thinking on my feet. So if you were to hurl an insult at me right now, Mike, I might not able to say something back. But then I'll go to sleep tonight and things will come in my head and I was like, I should have said that or I should have said that. Oh my God, I'm so witty. It's the same thing happens in interviews where I am an empath. And so if I am across and somebody just had a bad day or whatever, it can cause me to have self-doubt and it can cause me to not have a good performance. I perform best when someone says, here's a take-home test and do it on your own time. I will spend 3 hours, I will make it happen, and I will send that to you. So I think the second thing I want to do is also kind of learn people's style or ask them what is the best way that you can, perform your best. Because the goal is not to have someone give someone 45 minutes and say go and then see how they perform. That's not the goal. The goal is to see, hey, are you a good product manager? Are you a good match for this role? And we're not going to be solving problems in 45 minutes in real life. We're going to be writing documents. We're going to be writing PRDs. We're going to be taking feedback. We're going to put some thought. And so I feel like those are the kind of things that I would like to change in the process where we ask the candidate, what kind of process would they prefer that they are able to put their best foot forward and perform and show us and showcase their talents in the best way.
I think the overall theme, and this is why I like talking to you so much, is just personalizing it, making people feel comfortable so that they can perform their best, however that is for them, and allowing them the space to do that. So it's not so high pressure and thinking you have to say something brilliant right now, because it's not real life. That's not, the interview is supposed to simulate the job, and that's not work. That's not how people work, right? So if that were the case, like, the meetings would be the quickest meetings ever, because it would just be like, it'd be 5-minute bursts of meetings. So it makes no sense to me. So I really appreciate your refreshing approach to, making some changes to the interview process and how we assess talent in the product space. I think your background and your lens in terms of how you see things is refreshing. And I hope more people adopt that approach. And I know we've taken a lot of your time, but I want to end with, where can people connect with you?
So I have a LinkedIn, and my LinkedIn is, if you see my name, it's Rootuj. My first name and last name. That's the best way to connect with me. I'd love to hear from people. I love to mentor people. And of course, I have thoughts which can be different and radical. So if you ever want to have a discussion, I'll be more than happy to participate in that. And if you also need any interviewing help, I'm more than happy to give advice on both ends of the spectrum.
Rootu, thank you so much for being here. I had a blast and I learned so much. And thank you for providing this information to people. And I know this won't be the last time we're chatting. So I'm excited for a follow-up, because I feel like we could have gone in so many different areas here.
Absolutely. And thank you, Mike, for making this comfortable and fun.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you, everybody. We will see you again next week.
Do I hang up now?